I used to pride myself that this country never had the same level of race-based politics that America had and continues to have this day. I used to think that, thank God, at the very least, we don't have a history of the type of stuff that America has gone through over the past centuries. I mean, it's not perfect. Nothing is perfect. My family's had history with that. I myself have had some issues with that, though not as much as my dad and my other ancestors, but whatever, But at the very least, we had concrete issues which we could try and address. And for the most part, there weren't really any race baiters that you would find in America on both sides. Do the things that somebody like an Al Sharpton or a David Duke would do in the mainstream in this country for quite a long time. Until very recently, that is. Now we're starting to see more of that. For example, David Lammy's one of those. He actually went to university in Harvard and has probably brought back some of that here. Now, obviously, ideas travel independent of people moving physically, so this was probably something that has arrived slowly but surely over the past couple of decades. Unfortunately, it's really beginning to infect the discourse in this country. I don't think anybody should be using these tactics because I think it sows division, and I think we need to actually come together and have an actual dialogue as opposed to shouting about groups and who's to blame and who's to this. No, let's just fix the issues, shall we? Let's discuss these things and then implement change rather than use these things to advance agendas. We have issues here. We all know there are issues, regardless of how severe they are now or how severe they were in the past. Let's just do that. Well, apparently we can't. But anyway, this is a video response for the first time in quite a while to a person called Doreen Lawrence. Now, who is Doreen Lawrence? She is the Chancellor, I believe, of De Montfort University. That's quite a prestigious thing. And she is the mother of Stephen Lawrence, who was a black teenager who was pretty much left to die by the police almost 25 years ago now, I believe. Basically, he got stabbed and the police who arrived on the scene to save him didn't do a good job. They were very negligible, and I think it was probably due to the fact that these particular police officers were racist. I think that has been proven, and he died as a result of their negligence. There was independent investigations into this and the police were found institutionally racist. And since then, she's been campaigning against this type of stuff for a long time. Fast forward several decades, recently she's been interviewed by Channel 4, and oh my god, this is a bit of a car crash interview. It's only a minute of the interview though, so it's probably not in full context, unfortunately, but I can only find this clip on Twitter that Channel 4 themselves have posted and has since started to gain a bit of traction. Now, in this clip, she's talking about Grenfell. Now, what's Grenfell? Grenfell is, or was anyway, a tower block in one of the Tory constituencies in London, and it was one of the old 60s style brutalist tower blocks that was renovated. It was refurbished with a new kind of look and a new kind of infrastructure. Basically, they put padding on it. That's what they call it. The materials that they use perhaps aren't the safest they could use. It's very flammable, and a fire started in one of the many flats in this block, and it created a chain reaction which set the whole thing ablaze, killing people and leaving hundreds of people homeless. And this one tower block just so happened to be a mostly ethnic minority population. Now, she claims this. Now, let's just dive into it, shall we? I'm not going to spoil the video.
Nobody wanted to mention the word race in the whole thing.
See what I mean? It's been cut. It's kind of out of context, and this is all I can find. I can't seem to find it on YouTube. Every time I type in Doreen Lawrence, Channel 4 or Grenfell, it doesn't come up. Now, apparently she's saying that nobody wanted to address the race of this. Indeed, not even Premier Race Baiter Akala even mentioned race. He mentioned class. He believed it was a class issue. I myself thought maybe there was some kind of class issue involved with Grenfell, because it's not just this particular community that has had this refurbishment. All over the UK, these old 60s apartment buildings are either being demolished or being refurbished. Now, we need some more historical context to all of this. Originally, these council blocks were created to solve the issues of slums and poor Victorian housing in inner city areas. This wasn't something that was created to house these people in small areas to be easily controlled or anything Orwellian like that. It was literally one of the biggest civilian infrastructure projects in British history, and it has links way back into the 30s. It's something that had the greatest of intentions. Unfortunately, due to the way they planned this, because this was the height of Keynesianism and things like that, it didn't quite pan out. In the end, disaster fell on this regeneration project. Either other communities in the UK were completely forgotten for 40 to 50 years, for example, Openshaw, which I will bring up in a little while later. So they didn't get their regeneration projects until literally this decade, or the previous decade even. But the ones that were regenerated, whole communities, regardless of whatever race they were split up. The families were removed from people they knew and placed into new tower blocks or smaller buildings with people they didn't know. And the councils failed to maintain these areas. The whole look and structure and community and other aspects of these areas, like Hume in Manchester, were destroyed forever and completely changed. And they got run down and ruined over the course of 30 years, until eventually another regeneration project had to be done to sort this out, because eventually there were incentives that were unintentionally put in place so that councils and even the people themselves just neglected these areas. Nobody's going to fix something that either they don't have the money for or nobody can be bothered fixing, and crime and grime and all sorts of horrible stuff grew as a result of this, and this is probably what caused a lot of the civil unrest in the 80s. So that's why Grenfell was what it was. It was one of the many tower blocks that were saved from demolition and instead refurbished. Unfortunately, the refurbishing was rubbish. But she's mentioning that nobody wanted to mention race. I just don't think it was really relevant to it. I think that's why people weren't mentioning it. It was a class thing, because it is mainly working class people, or underclass really if you want to go that far, who live in these buildings, because that's what it was designed for. But let's just continue, guys.
Because when I saw the residents who lived in that block, to me it was under no doubt around the racism.
There were white residents of Grenfell too. Was it racist towards them that they lost their homes as well, or was it something else? Is it just they were second-hand victims of the government and council's racism towards the rest of the residents of Grenfell? Or is it that they're all poor and the establishment views poor people's basically all the same riff-raff anyway, and were neglected and were given a shoddy refurbishment job, a regeneration job, which, as we've seen in the past 50, 60 years, they've been known to do, regardless of good intentions or not.
That existed at that time, because I think had that been a block full of white people in there, they would have done everything to get them out as fast as possible and make sure that they did what they needed to do.
No mention of individuals, just nebulous groups, just they, the ever-eternal they. She means the white establishment, I imagine. Or the fire brigade. I assume she means that the fire brigade lapsed in their duty because these people happened not to be white, or most of them happened not to be white. That is a very strong accusation to make towards the fire service. It's divisive because it's telling ethnic minorities such as myself that you will not be looked after because of what group you're a part of by these racist services or the council or the government. Because you can clearly tell from what happened at Grenfell that this was a extreme fire. This was something abnormally large for something like that, again because of how the structure was built. To accuse the fire service of not doing their job properly because these people happen to be mostly non-whites is just absurd. Again, look at what happened. Any firefighter would have found that incredibly difficult to do. It's not the same as what happened to your son when, and I don't think that's fair either to say that they did that, because the fire service, regardless of who they're saving, have to save them and do willingly go into these flames to save people. I would just like to add an addendum to this. There is actual criticisms that you can level at the fire brigade, for example. Their policies were very much proven to be under par for such a fire. Usually their policy when it comes to tower block fires is essentially keep people in their flats because they're made out of solid concrete and they have fire doors and things like that. The flat I live in has fire doors, for example, and wait for the fire brigade to isolate the fire in question and put it out. Unfortunately, the fire actually spread from the exterior as opposed to the interior, which made that policy null and void. This was a policy error. This is not something they did because these people happen to be a different race. In fact, if you look at pictures of the fire brigade at the scene, you can see that not all of them are white. So are those men racist? They're just firefighters, regular, normal people who were told to do things in a particular way. And in fact, the fire brigade did actually break the rules during this attempt to extinguish the fire. They went in there without knowing whether or not the tower block was structurally sound. They're not supposed to do that. They're actually meant to wait until engineers can determine whether or not it is. But because of the huge fire, they went in anyway. And they had issues with trying to find people because during the pandemonium, people were moving around a lot, and firefighter operators were talking to one particular person who had moved somewhere, and the firefighters thought she was in this particular spot, but she was actually in another place, and the operator couldn't guide them because the operator themselves didn't know where the firefighters were, because This is the realities of firefighting. It's dark, it's messy, smoky. It's not fair to say that they didn't try their best. They made mistakes, huge glaring mistakes, but those mistakes weren't from a racial point of view. It was purely down to administration error. It was policy failure. They made many mistakes during that whole debacle, but you can't say that the men on the ground didn't try their damned hardest. Again, they broke their own rules to save these people. So how is it that they're now racist for not doing a good job?
Baroness Lawrence's comments aren't targeted at any individual. More than 25 years after her own son's death, Baroness Lawrence sees parallels in the Grenfell tragedy.
She isn't targeting individuals, because if she did, she'd get sued. She's targeting groups, but she's not actually targeting even the fire service, really. She's targeting the ethnicity of the people in the fire service. She's targeting white people, and also she's trying to agitate non-whites. That's what she's trying to do here. Apparently this will help solve the issues by creating more division and more tension between different groups. I just don't see how this is actually going to solve any of the issues.
Because you think how many more lives have lost in Stephen, how many families are grieving, and what has the authority done?
What did they do for Openshaw, which is a mostly white working class area in Manchester? What did they do? The local authority didn't do anything for them. They didn't get regeneration until the 2000s, 2010s. They were neglected for many, many years. Would you say that's racism or classism? But apparently not a word comes out from her mouth about that. She doesn't care that this happens to other communities in the country. She's only interested in her agenda.
Nothing really. So in that respect, nothing has changed towards grieving family from the ethnic minority. Nothing has changed in that respect.
Nothing has changed. So is that why the police is constantly trying to push for more inclusive recruitment strategies and policing strategies? Is that why in London they've actually rolled back things like stop and search? This is why they've also been pushing out into the internet spheres and trying to tackle harassment and offensive language and things like that. So how can you say that nothing has changed? And how can you sit there and say, oh, because these firemen were white, they didn't do a good job? It's just ridiculous. And the thing is, she's not even criticising the job afterwards when it took ages for the council to actually rehouse these people. Again, it makes me wonder, is she just trying to change these institutions to suit her own political beliefs? Is that what she's trying to do? Is she trying to... And then at the end of this clip, as you can see here, the London Fire Brigade refutes that there was any aspect of racism in their response, and that every firefighter was fully committed to rescuing as many people as possible, putting their own lives at risk, which they did. That's what they have to do as firefighters. So anyway, that's the end of the video. I don't know what more to say than this is just race-baiting nonsense. But unfortunately, I just see this continuing, and I think eventually we're going to see Channel 4 bring on somebody who's white doing this, saying, oh, well, if this particular community were ethnic minority, then perhaps the council would have done more to give them funding and stuff like that. You'll be beginning to see that, I reckon, because of rhetoric like this, and that always seems to happen. That's why the alt-right, when that arrived, shined as brightly as it did because of the social justice, anti-white rhetoric. And does she really want that? Does Doreen Lawrence really want these agitators from the white community, to use that term, pushing their agenda on Channel 4 News? No, I don't think she does. That's probably the logical next step from her. So anyway, I'm going to end it there. See you later, guys.